Tapi tadi message-nya Ristan tidak?
Morning, everyone. We probably give another 5 minutes to allow more students and participants to join the CME session. And we will start probably just 5 minutes past 10. Thank you. Okay, we shall start now. Assalamualaikum and very good morning to everyone, to all the participants who has been sparing your valuable time on Friday morning to join the department CME, Department of Community Health, Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, University of Malaysia. For this morning, it's specially organized by the Family Health Unit. So I have other members of the Family Health Unit with me today as well. On my left is Dr. Noliza, the head of the department. And then I as well as Associate Professor Dr. Nur Afiah on my right hand side. So I believe Dr. Vimala is already in the Zoom. Yes, hi, how are you? Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. I'm so happy to be here.
It's been a while since we last met, and it's actually a great pleasure to talk to you live again, although it's virtually, but it's very meaningful. So I want you to meet the members of my unit, Dr. Noliza as well as Dr. Nur Afiah. We have another member as well who is currently on sick leave, and we pray for her super speedy recovery and be able to go back to work soon. So for this morning, I actually feel very honored to welcome our special guest all the way from Trinidad, Dr. Vimala Kamaluddin, who's been able, we really appreciate your effort to actually spend some time, this valuable time to talk about collecting data for mixed method research using online mode, right? So before we start, let me just introduce Dr. Vimala, a little bit about Dr. Vimala. Dr. Vimala Kamaluddin is a faculty member at the School of Education, University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago, where she specializes in maths and computer science education. She became interested in mixed method research while doing her doctoral studies at the University of Sheffield, United Kingdom. Her thesis used a complex mixed method design focusing on hybrid data from an educational online social network. Dr. Kamaluddin is engaged in mixed methods research at her institution in game-based learning, very interesting, and successfully hosted and chaired the third Regional Mixed Method Research Conference in the Caribbean 2019 earlier that year, the one that I actually joined in, right?
That's
so
right.
Dr. Kamaluddin is the co-chair of the Outreach and Development Committee of the Mixed Methods International Research Association, Caribbean chapter. She is also the immediate past president of the MMIRACC, who chaired the Mixed Method International Conference in the Caribbean in 2019. So she has experience in facilitating mixed method research workshops locally and internationally. So I'm not planning to waste any more time. So please welcome Dr. Vimala Kamaluddin for her talk today. And to any of the participants who wants to ask questions, you are free to type in your questions in the chat box, and we will go through all the questions towards the end of the session. So the floor is yours, Dr. Vimala. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Just to make sure that you are seeing my slide as the full slideshow, or no? Are you seeing it now?
Yes, we can see the slide, yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. So mine is the pleasure indeed to reconnect with you, Halimatos, and mine is a big honor to be speaking to your colleagues and students at University Putra, Malaysia. I've never been to Malaysia, but I believe from what you're seeing in with my background, perhaps some of our climate is similar. And, I hope that whatever, so thankful to you for all the hard work in organizing this particular guest lecture. So I think the time has come to talk about mixed methods research in online spaces. And I think it's because both areas are so interesting and innovative. I hope that my presentation can give you some insight into how my own journey in mixed methods in a social networking site came about and share some of the issues that I had to deal with and that I had to take decisions on. And of course, the results of my research as well. So I'm happy to be with you for the next 45 minutes or so, and hope that you, with your own knowledge as well and what you bring, can learn maybe something new, and that together we will have a wonderful journey. I'm just going to turn off my video for the rest of my presentation and turn it back on if that's okay with all of you. So to help me with my talk today, I will start by talking about my research and then delve into exactly what is mixed methods research. I'll give you some definitions and proceed to show my mixed methods design, which I call eclectic. And I hope that by the end of my talk, you will agree with me that it is in fact so. I will also delve into some benefits and challenges of doing mixed methods research in online spaces and what decisions I had to take and what might influence you if you are desirous of doing this particular work or similar as well. So what was my research problem? Well, as an educator and a classroom teacher at the secondary level for more than 20 years, I became increasingly concerned about teacher isolation. Now, I know your area is health and community, my area is education, but I think as I go along, I hope that you'll find several things that will resonate with you that may be similar in how you may choose to approach your own research problems. So my own was the idea of teacher isolation, especially in schools with toxic cultures. And I thought in my own bubble that this was just something unique to Trinidad and Tobago. But then as I started to read, I realized that this is a pervasive problem. And Linda Darling-Hammond has been talking a lot about it in the United States, writing and talking about it. Perhaps it's even an issue in Malaysia. I'm not actually sure. So she talked about the need for collaboration and communication. And those are actually two 21st century learning skills that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And the need for ongoing professional learning, not just professional development. And I want, as we continue to talk, to distinguish between professional development and professional learning, which is ongoing and continuous. And then reflecting on something that Desimone talked about is that a lot of teachers were taken off classroom time to do professional development. And they always complained about the lack of time. It was important to think about teachers and center them in the solution. And so according to Chris Deed, safe and inexpensive, scalable solutions were needed to align with teachers' hectic schedules. Okay, so I had to then think about what solutions are possible for my research problem. And so I set about in my research to create an online community of practitioners, catering to ongoing professional learning. I wanted a space where teachers could connect, learn, and share with each other, thus facilitating communication and collaboration across diverse school contexts. And what was important for me was that teachers could gain access whenever they wanted, whatever time they wanted, and that they wouldn't really have to pay for it. And in my reading, Felicianos et al. Talk about participatory culture in these kinds of spaces. So I wondered, what would that space look like for teachers? So I wanted to create a community of practitioners for ongoing professional learning, create a space for teachers to connect, to learn, and to share, facilitate communication and collaboration across school contexts that was democratic, public, and cheap, and to explore what participatory culture looked like in such an online space. And as you can see, everything that I was doing is grounded in the literature. But what space to use? That was a big question. And of course, the first thing that when we talk about online spaces, we think about is Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, and Instagram, and so on. And while social media is all around us, I did not feel that it was appropriate for what I wanted, even though there are many teacher groups in all of these spaces. And there wasn't sufficient conclusive research that those spaces, social media spaces, are best suited for what I wanted as well, to match my goals. And so in spite of the work of Christine Greenhow working with students with Facebook, in Trinidad, you had to be so cautious, because of culture. And so I didn't want something that was so loose and so available and where privacy might have been a concern. And I didn't want something so structured like a course management system like Moodle either, because I wanted to be able to embed Web 2.0 tools. So I read the work of Neil Selwyn, and he talked about the prominence of social networking sites. And it was something that educators were becoming very excited by. And so I decided to choose a social networking site using a walled garden approach for data privacy. And then there was a question, because this is a research study, of what research approach to use. And of course, we know there's quantitative approaches, qualitative approaches, and there are mixed methods approaches. So I came across the work of Hesbiber and Griffin, who talked about the use of internet-mediated mixed methods research for harnessing the power of Web 2.0 technology. And get this part, to address difficult and complex social issues within and across disciplines and across the globe. And I thought, yes, this looks like what I want to marry. I want to use mixed methods in online space. And so my research purpose was thus to explore online participation on a social networking site for teachers using a mixed methods approach. Now, in order for us to have, when we're doing any kind of talk and doing any kind of research, it's really important to bring some definitions into play so that both you and I are saying the same thing or have some shared understanding of the terminologies on which the work is predicated. So some key definitions around social network would be quite varied. So since 1995, Gunawardena et al. Talked about social networks as an online space that allows for the embedding of asynchronous, synchronous, or hybrid learning, Web 2.0 tools. Now, I would say now in 2022, that still holds. And I don't need to talk to you about asynchronous, synchronous, and hybrid, because I know everybody is going through COVID and everybody is very familiar with all sorts of ways of remote learning. So I wouldn't talk too much about that. White House 2011 talked about social networks as being inexpensive and scalable, facilitating communication and collaboration, something which I talked about earlier. Felicianos and Kimmons talk about social networks as allowing for the formation of connection or ties, thereby allowing for knowledge sharing. And we all know knowledge sharing is at the heart of what you call knowledge societies. And in recent times, knowledge mobilization, knowledge sharing, knowledge dissemination has dominated all kinds of conversations across the disciplines. And again, Christine Greenhow talks about how public and visible those social connections can be on a social network. Some key definitions of online participation are also important, but these were more difficult to find. I came across the work of Stefan Rastinsi from Finland, who talked about reading as online participation in e-learning situations as a process of learning by taking part and maintaining relations with others in online courses. He built upon the work of Lave and Wenger, 1991, who talks about participation in community as a way individuals understand, take part, and subscribe to the norms, behaviors, and values of the communities they choose. And of course, that is valid even if it is online communities of practice. Priest and Scheidemann talk about online participation as reading and writing online in a particular community. And so reading and writing therefore form the core part of online participation, especially when it comes to be involved in activities and how people interact with each other in some sort of online community. In this particular case, a social networking site. Okay, so having looked very quickly at some of the definitions that undergird my study, I bring to you now my guiding research questions. And remembering that it's a mixed method study, there are two mixed questions and one qualitative question. One mixed question is, what is the nature of teachers' online participation in a social networking site? Another is, what are differences in teachers' online participation in a social networking site? I know some of you may be thinking, but wait, doesn't that sound like a quantitative question? Well, as you read the literature and mixed methods research, you would find that what are differences can be a quantitative question, or it can be approached from a mixed point of view as well. So that would be the case in my study. And a qualitative question, how do teachers describe their experiences on the social networking site? So my study was guided by these three main research questions. Now, before I get into the methods part of this talk, I need to declare my positionality. Halimatos already said that I am a lecturer at the University of the West Indies at a place called St. Augustine in Trinidad. And many of you may not know, I don't know how many of you have visited, but Trinidad is part of a twin island republic, basically just about 1.5 million people. It's multinational. English is our main language. It's, as you can see, we are warm, tropical climate. I identify as a Trinidadian Muslim woman born in a home with 2 parents, 4 siblings. I have my husband and 3 children and 2 grandchildren who were recent additions to my life, which are on the right hand of that screen there. The one in yellow, his name is Dhakir Muhammad, and the one on the right is my granddaughter, Sana Inaya. And you can tell how special they are to me. I do this work in education because I feel no country can progress unless their education system is top-notch. Education is at the heart of our life. If we are not educated, we cannot learn, we cannot grow, and we cannot understand our society, ourselves, or our creator, or our purpose. So this is my position. This is what I believe. As Halimat has already said, she met me and we have reconnected after quite some years, since 2019. The middle picture is Halimatus and me there at the 2019 conference in Trinidad, which was something, a really amazing experience, where I was president of the Caribbean chapter of the Mixed Methods International Research Association. And being part of that, I was able to meet many amazing people from whom I have learned a lot about my mixed methods as well. In the middle of the picture on the left is Professor John Creswell and his wife, Mariko. They are from the United States, but he migrated to Japan. And also I was fortunate to visit him in Japan a couple of years ago as well. And that was something amazing. And I learned even more and connected with people there. And some of the people you see in this picture are also people who helped make the conference happen. So part of my family, really. So in terms of how you learn about mixed methods, is you really need to be part of a mixed methods community, and to learn and to support, and of course to share whatever you know, and I again reiterate, I hope that whatever I say today might be beneficial to at least some of you. As I talk about education, I can never be free of this thing called the wicked problem, or the wicked problems. And I often wondered how, since I was a child, and then when I was a teacher, and now I'm a university lecturer, how come we can't solve some of these problems? Some of the problems in education and some of the problems in health, we just can't seem to solve. And I didn't know the language for it, but there's a term called wicked problems, so complex. But Professor Donna Mertens says the challenges that emanate from the concept of wicked problems and the promises associated with mixed methods is to understand complexity through diverse approaches. And so all of these people helped to convince me that in order to move forward, to solve up the many problems we have, we need to embrace some methods and approaches that we may not have considered before or understood as well, in order to get better insight and deeper understandings of the problem. So that brings me to the big question: what is mixed methods research? And I've mentioned a couple of things already. And I know many of you are probably already doing work in mixed methods research. And perhaps to some of you it's new, perhaps some of you you've already been doing it. But just take a moment. I'll give you about 30 seconds if you can grab a pen and paper, or if you can have your phone and you want to talk into it, or whatever you want to do. Can you just jot down what you think mixed methods research is? And I'm going to count 30 seconds to give you a chance to do that, please. All right. I hope that you might have been able to jot something down, or start to jot something down. And I'm going to show you 3 definitions that I think are important in mixed methods research. So the first one is by Burt Johnson and Anthony Onwubueze, who say that in a seminal article called Towards a Definition of Mixed Methods Research, they state that this is a type of research in which the researcher or team of researchers combines elements of qualitative and quantitative research approaches for the broad purposes of breadth and depth of understanding and corroboration. For example, using qualitative and quantitative viewpoints, data collection, analyses, inferencing, and so on. So this is by Johnson and Awuzie, 2004. Another one is by John Creswell and Vicky Plano-Clark. And while I have the 2007 version, it comes from the book called Designing and Conducting Mixed Methods Research by Creswell and Plano-Clark. Shown here on the left is the third edition. I'm sure many of you have a copy, but I'll just go through this definition because it's also here. Mixed methods research is a research design with philosophical assumptions as well as methods of inquiry. As a methodology, it involves philosophical assumptions that guide the direction of the collection and analysis of data and the mixture of qualitative and quantitative data in a single study or series of studies. Its central premise is that the use of the quant and the qual in combination provides a better understanding of the research problems than either approach alone. That is, as either one approach or the other. A third concept is integration. And as you would notice, Creswell in 2015 talked about integration as the place or point in the mixed methods research process where the quantitative and the qualitative phases interconnect or cohere. Since 2006, Robert Yin talked about integration as the critical attribute that distinguishes a mixed methods investigation from a multi-method inquiry. And that's a question many people ask. Is mixed methods the same as multi-method? And the answer is no. And the answer is right here in this definition by Yin. Elizabeth Kramer in 2018, and of course, backing on Johnson, Awuzie, and Turner, talks about integration. Components of qualitative and quantitative research approaches are explicitly associated with each other within an investigation, such that interpretations and inferences give breadth and depth to answering research questions. Now, just to go back to quant and qual, as you're taking all of these definitions in, I choose to think about quantitative approaches as one that tests a theory. It establishes hypotheses and sets about an investigation to test whether a hypothesis is null or the alternative hypothesis is valid, and test a theory. It tests it with as wide a sample as possible. So it's about breadth and it's about generalization of the applicability of that theory. It uses a deductive approach. Qualitative approach, on the other hand, is an inductive approach, working with the data on the ground and analyzing and teasing out those data for patterns, and then generating a theory which is proposed. So, qualitative approach seeks to understand a particular phenomenon quite deeply, but does not deal with breadth. So, in summary, quant is a deductive approach which seeks to test a theory. Qual is an inductive approach which seeks to generate a theory. And when you bring quant and qual together, The only way you can do that so that it makes sense is when you apply the principle of integration. So integration is at the heart of mixed methods research. So what are your newer and more nuanced understandings of mixed methods research? Did you get any? Did these definitions help you to improve the definition that you might have scribbled, a couple of minutes ago? If you could put some responses into the chat, that would be wonderful. Either that you say that those definitions were helpful, or that pretty much you knew all of that already and you were able to write out a definition that was pretty clear to you. Whichever way it is, working through the definitions help to give you a broader understanding and a deeper understanding of what mixed methods research is about. And I don't know if there are any volunteers who may want to share what they understood from it. I don't know if Halimatus can accommodate that orally. If not, as I say, in the chat, please feel free to just say, yeah, I got something out of those definitions. No, I know all of it already. It's fine, whichever way. Okay, so we talked about those definitions, and now you cannot talk about research without talking about your worldview, talking about your paradigm, talking about what is your epistemology, your axiology, your ontology. How do you come to understand truth? What is your idea of truth? How do you seek truth? What do you consider to be knowledge and real? Just kind of summarize all that together. But one of the main worldviews that really works with mixed methods is something called pragmatism. According to Abbas Tashikari and Charles Tedley, pragmatism is based upon the proposition that researchers should use the philosophical and the methodological approach that works best for the research problem that is being investigated. I'm going to read that again. Pragmatism is based upon the proposition that researchers should use the approach that works best to solve the research problem. In my research, I adopted a pragmatic stance. I felt that mixed methods research bridged the gap between the so-called scientific method and what you call more naturalistic methods. It allowed me to use multiple methods. It helped me keep focused on answering my key research questions. And it aligned well with helping to make some of the methodological decisions that you absolutely have to make when using mixed methods research. So I have now declared that I have used pragmatism as my worldview for my study. Well, what rationale did I have for marrying quantitative and qualitative approaches? Well, Green, Caroselli, and Graham, 1989, talk about 5 different reasons or rationales or purposes for mixing qual and quan. And in my study, I looked at 2 of them, complementarity and expansion. I considered the quan and the qual together to complement each other to give me a more complete data set. It allowed me to see trends and also anomalies and outliers. But also to explain those trends and explain those anomalies. It also allowed me to have an expanded data set so that I could perhaps gain a deeper understanding and explore further the nature of teachers' online participation. So we come to the part, what exactly was this design that I keep talking about? Okay, so again, I talk about my eclectic design. Here it is in a diagrammatic form. What might first jump out at you, and I know you're probably trying to make sense of this quite complex diagram, is that you should see three phases, a phase 1, a phase 2, and a phase 3. You should also see that I have tried to capture different points of integration. You should also see that I tried to establish the sampling techniques that I used and the recruitment techniques, as well as trying to specify what types of data I was using or playing with in these different phases. I will take each phase and try to explain it even further. Let's start with phase 1. Phase 1 was qualitative data, and the purpose of phase 1 was to provide foresight into designing the social networking site for teachers and to gain critical friends to access the field. Now, for a lot of you who do qualitative work, this is pretty standard. So I collected, analyzed, and interpreted qualitative data in phase 1. I used purposive sampling. I used interviews of a teacher, curriculum officer, and an educational technologist. I used thematic analysis, and what I got out of it were the design elements of the social networking site to facilitate 4 things: privacy, sociability, communication, and collaboration. Now, I already talked about communication and collaboration as 21st century learning skills, but sociability I did not touch on. And it's very important if you're having a social networking site and you want to have teachers connect with each other, that you have sociability. So that's why that's important. And of course, data privacy is important because you may have things there that people only want to share with certain people. So the results of phase 1 was the building of my social networking site. Yes, I designed and launched my social networking site, Spruits.com. I embedded Web 2.0 tools like blogs, polls, file upload, download, chat room, video conference, and so on. The site was introduced by emailing a link to Trinbago teachers with an invitation to register, using a census survey, and then a snowball sampling method. That's when teachers could have then issued, participants could have invited others beyond who I initially invited. Participants used an email address to register and were asked to create a profile for virtual representation of self. They were asked by email to complete consent forms and send it back. But unregistered participants could visit some of the free pages on the site, and I just call those visitors. So it was launched, and this little screenshot kind of shows what a web page looked like, with calendar and searching and comments and polls and so on. Phase 2. Having launched the site, then I was able to obtain qualitative and quantitative data, which, as I said, were complementary data sets. Let's look at those complementary data sets. The quantitative data, which is on the left, were really captured as site metrics. There were tons of metrics such as timestamps, nature of the poster, frequency, duration, number of likes, number of reads, number of downloads, number of uploads, number of visitors, number of visits per page, number of participants, and okay, all of this is of course numeric data. I got poll data using something called Zoomerang, and therefore I looked at analyzing those data through participation in different activities. Google Analytics gave me a great help with descriptive and inferential statistics. The qualitative data set were really all the posts. And what were those posts? Those posts were written text, they were audio, they were video, they were chat data, they were profile data, including photographs and the pseudonym. Every single word, letter, or image on the site constitutes qualitative data. And so the analysis that I conducted was participation by interaction between persons on the site. And I use social network analysis and discourse analysis. So ultimately, as the site grew, I'd be doing something called, I would have generated big data, which sounds exciting, but actually is very difficult to work with because you have to do a lot of data reduction. So that's one of the first things to caution about in this very exciting field of the online world. So what did I find from analyzing those complementary data sets in phase 2? Well, I was able to answer 2 research questions from looking at the differences in participation and participation patterns. I was able to generate that people participated in different ways. Teachers participated in different ways and came up with 5 rules of participation, which were built upon some work that Priest and Scheidemann 2009 had done. The 5 roles are window shoppers, content consumers, content producers, collaborators, and leaders. So who were those? The whole big, I will start with content consumers. So content consumers were registered users who simply came on the site and they read different posts. They read whatever material was on, but they said nothing. They made no contribution at all. And I would have known that because you will know the time they came on, the time they came off, the duration, the page they landed on. A lot of the site metrics would have helped me to understand who were content consumers. Now, when those content consumers actually made a reply or an original post, then they were actually adding content to the site. So then they were content producers. So those who read and wrote onto the site were content producers. And this diagram here actually shows the relative difference in participation. The largest group, as you can see in this red here, outer circle, would have been content consumers. People basically came on to read, but not to post. Then a smaller bit came on to post. Those were the content producers. An even smaller number of that, which is a further subset, who are people who I call collaborators, that they try to make connections with different persons and made not just posts, but tried to interact with people in different ways. And then tiny number, actually just 2 persons out of all the persons, emerged as what you call leaders. These were persons who kind of took ownership of the site and really made a stamp on the site. And so over time, I came up with these 4. Now you would see a whole big blue area here called window shoppers. Who are those people? Well, those are the people who never registered on the site, but came onto the site, and Google Analytics would have still picked them up as visitors to the site, but they were not registered. Hence, I didn't have a name or a username for them. So many, many people from all over the world, in fact, actually visited the site. The site actually grew way beyond Trinidad and Tobago. People from the States, people from Canada, UK, and so on, somehow either through Google search, I'm not sure how, found the site, found whatever it was, and were reading on the site, but may not have registered on the site. And so a whole world of people were called, what I call, standing on the outside and looking in, and that's window shoppers. So I was able to generate these roles from phase 1 and phase 2. This particular diagram, you aren't expected to read all of it, shows the profile of a leader, someone who over the course of time, and that's participated in multiple ways and in many different activities. And I will talk about a bit of those activities a little bit later on. But this just showed you how I was also able to look at each person individually and track their participation as to who was a leader, content consumer, and so on. So again, I'm trying to emphasize that I was able to look at participation in a different way, or in a way that I had not even thought about before. This is just a screenshot of this person, Yemi J, who a typical post, what that post looked like. And all of this would have undergone some discourse analysis as well, in terms of how this person was supporting this younger teacher, Lucia, and giving a suggestion on how she could have improved her lesson planning. There's no need to really read it right now, but this was just a typical, this is a screenshot of just a piece of the post and that exchange that would have taken me quite a while to analyze later on. Phase 3. So phase 3 came about when I was sought to explain the difference in the rules of participation and to also garner the experiences of the persons on the social networking site. Why did people participate the way they did? Because up to that point, I only had how they participated and that they participated differently. And so I generated 4 cases: content consumer, producer, collaborator, and leader. I looked at samples from each of these groups. I invited persons from these groups to interview, to semi-structured interview based on the site metrics as well. And so that in that interview, I sought to explain what the ways that teachers participated on the social networking site, and also to confirm and discover the mixed data results, whether what they were saying now was confirmatory of what the phase 2 data had actually told me before. And so I conducted those interviews in phase 3. It was another qualitative phase. This particular thing summarizes the experiences of the leader, which pulls together the metric data from the site plus the interview. And I was able to come up with a composite of who this leader, there were 2 leaders, but the one was male, one was female, this leader, Yemi J, what it is that she did. And I'll just read a part of it for you just because you may be curious. So Yemi J, which is of course a pseudonym, spent more than 6 months on the site, was registered from May to November. During the research period, she visited frequently, contributed to the site in a number of ways. Her initial reason for joining the site was to share her expertise with her colleagues. She set up her user profile, spent time reading and participating in polls, discussion forums, media sharing, and blogs. She created a wiki, collaborated on a Google Doc presentation, and engaged in a number of online chats, which was synchronous. Yemi J believed that the site was interesting and stated that work priorities prevented her from participating more. She felt comfortable using blogs and emails and participated for the first time in a forum. Yemi J believed that the site was not that easy to navigate. She claimed she was aware of online courses being offered for professional development and that the site allowed her to express her views freely and allowed her to network with colleagues in other schools. Yemi J indicated that the site met her expectations well in showcasing technology-led lessons. She felt great to be part of the network and believed it could evolve into a professional community of teachers. Her open comments will spread the word so that more teachers will use it. Yemi J can be considered to be a leader. So this was at the end of phase 3 when I looked at profiles of each of the 4 roles that I had generated. So what other insights did I gain from this study? Well, I was able to gain and gather or figure out benefits of the online participation as well as challenges of those online participation. Some of the benefits were confirmed to be being able to connect with colleagues. And remember, one of the major problems that I was trying to solve was the issue of teacher isolation. And I wanted a space where teachers could have connected. And that was one of the major benefits that and results that came about, that they were able to connect with each other. They were also able to learn something new. They were able to share expertise with others. They were able to share opinions and see what other colleagues were doing. This is a result of a number of thematic analyses of data from both posts and the qualitative phases of the study. Some of the barriers to online participation, and there were many. The major one being the issue of time, and time evolved as a complex issue to be further interrogated. Time, as you know, was one of the issues where teachers could not do professional development in the first case, but it also turned out that time was an issue in terms of barriers to participation. An issue was also priorities at work, especially with examination classes and testing, heavy testing. An issue came up with the navigability of the SNS. I mean, I tried my best, but I, of course, would have had limits in my technical capabilities and what was available to me at that time. Interestingly, in Trinidad, some of the cultural norms that pervade us in person also pervaded the online environment. In terms of Trinidad have something called a macro culture, in that we like to look on, but we don't like to speak out. And so that also happened with the number of window shoppers and content consumers that the data showed that existed. There also seemed to be a lack of readiness for professional learning, even though there was a lament for professional development and for it to be structured. When teachers were given opportunities for professional learning on their own time, they still could not really grab onto the concept well. And there was the pervading idea that their data would be leaked and somebody would tell the Ministry of Education what they said or what they didn't say. And they also always had a fear of the principal and different kind authoritative figures. Somehow they also had a fear of what other people said and if they were saying the right things. So those were barriers to online participation, many of which are confirmed in the literature, but of which a few related to cultural factors were new to the literature, which of course my study added to the body of literature out there on barriers to online participation. So in summary, what was my research about? My goal was to explore and understand teacher online participation in a social networking site. My research paradigm was pragmatism. My research questions, I had given those already. And the purpose of mixing were for complementarity and expansion. So this slide kind of summarizes my whole study in terms of design. For those of you who are very familiar with Creswell's core and complex designs, advanced designs, I highlight to you that my study included 3 core designs. That is, a sequential exploratory design where I started with the qualitative phase, a sequential explanatory design where I ended with a qualitative phase, and a concurrent phase where qual and quant were combined and captured together. So my design is what I call an eclectic design, because there is no textbook that actually speaks to the way I did up my design or the way I combined it. And so I call it a complex or eclectic design. And I hope that maybe you consider it that way too, because it's not simple, it's not straightforward. I could not exit this talk without repeating about integration and the importance. You can read more, Fetters, Curry, and Creswell, 2013. I use integration through building, integration through merging, and integration through connecting. Integration occurred through building the social networking site from the analyses of the qual in phase 1. Integration took place through merging of qual and quant complementary data sets. And integration took place through connecting the interviewees and the interviews from the sampling frame from phase 2. So I used 3 types of integration in my study. Finally, what are some of the challenges in using mixed methods research in online spaces? And what were some of the decisions that I had to make? And I hope, and what might be some guidelines for you as you embark or continue to embark upon using mixed methods research in online spaces. It starts with the ethical concerns with researching the internet. Annette Markham talked about the field of internet research as a shifting ground. I choose to think of it as a shifting space because it changes size, it changes shape. It doesn't have a boundary that you can think about or understand. It does not grow linearly, and therefore, how do you actually say what is the bound? You will have to place some of those bounds onto your internet space. There are always issues of data privacy and management of online identity, and how safe is data on the social web. There are a few models to follow methodologically. Up to now, there are still a few models in terms of how do you do this right? How do you protect participant identity and data? Content authorship. When you have a collaborative exchange, you have an idea and then the idea is built upon, and all this is done in the public. Who owns that content? Who owns that idea when it meshes with so many people's views and ideas and input? And ultimately, how do you gain consent very clearly from participants, giving them a complete picture of what they're about to embark on? How do you write up those consent forms so that they are comprehensive and get ethical clearances? You have to be very, very comprehensive and think out a lot of things in advance before getting ethical clearance and approval from the university. Some of the challenges in using this eclectic mixed methods design, while I presented it here, and I hope you think it's at least pretty, but it was quite detailed, quite rigorous, and therefore it took a lot of time to plan and implement all those 3 phases: enactment, permissions, funding, ethical boards, and so on. It took time to develop and validate several instruments. It took a lot of skills and proficiency in analyzing big data. You have to have skills and proficiency in both quant and qual. You have to identify suitable sampling designs at every stage. And you just have to know when do you just stop all of it and work with the data that you have. So these are challenges that I bring to you at the forefront so that you can keep these in mind as you embark about using mixed methods in an online space, and mixed methods in general, in fact. So I want to summarize that a way forward is You must declare your research paradigm. You must state your purpose clearly. Write your research questions so that they could be answered. Decide on why you are mixing your methods and identify the points of integration of the qual and quant. If you do all of this, you should have a fairly robust mixed methods research proposal and study. So I had some remaining questions at the end of my study and continue to have some of those, but some of those including how do you mix online and offline data, and how do I continue to make sense of the wicked problems in education? And of course, that does not take away all the wicked problems that also exist in health and in many other domains and disciplines. So I thank you for being such a wonderful audience and for listening to me for about this past hour. And I turn it back to Halimatos and invite your questions. And thank you so much for having me here today to do my presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vimala. It was a very, very overwhelming, I would say, and very heavy topics, I would say. But we have learned a lot from the presentation just now. So I open for any questions from the floor. If there is any issues related to collecting data for mixed method research involving online medium. The chat box is actually empty. Probably the participants are too overwhelming with all the questions.
Why?
I'm not sure. But I have a question for you, Dr. Vimala.
Yes.
I think the main issue here is that most of us, including myself, we have no experience in terms of collecting data, especially for the qualitative component, using an online mode. So what I've seen in your presentation, you have used several approaches of online approaches, I mean, when it comes to collecting your data in both aspects, quantitative and qualitative approaches of the mixed methods. So my question is, would it be enough if we just use a Zoom application, for example, conducting an in-depth interviews or focus group discussion, and consider that as the sole qualitative data for your mixed method research, rather than having several sources, video component, you know, written feedback, that sort of thing. So what do you think about that?
Remember, everything in a study has to align to each other. What is your research focus? What is it you want to do? What kind of understanding? But there's also something called scope, right? There's also something called scope. So if you want to conduct interviews, and there would be Zoom interviews, and those interviews can actually be audio or audio and video. You may decide that I'm cutting off the video and you're just working with audio and then working with transcription of the audio, of which you may then want to cater for like pauses and ers and put some codes onto that and say, my data is basically interviews from the audio, and I'm going to cater for the nonverbal through either tone or pauses, some other way of doing it. And that's going to be my source of data. And that's fine. You may also decide that I want to include non-verbal data in a significant way. And we all know majority of communication is non-verbal, right? You can read any source that tells you that. So if 90% of communication is non-verbal and 10% is verbal, you may decide, well, I want to use the video too. I want to see how they use their hands. I want to see facial expressions. I want to try to get the intonation. I want to see everything about this interview. And then you decide I'm doing 1, 2, or 3 interviews, whatever those numbers are. Remember, you're always bound by, if you have research funding, for example, you're bound by research funds, by research capacity, by the length of time you have to produce the research. And therefore, you have to work within some sort of scope. So there's no right and wrong answer for the amount of data you choose to work with. You have to work with sufficient data till you get data saturation in your analysis. And that can happen if you can interview one person 3 times, for example, and get, I don't know, about 40, 50, 100 pages of transcription data. You can, and follow that person in a biography. You can interview 3 persons for 1 hour each. And each hour is about 20 pages of interview transcript. And therefore you say, that's the amount of data I'm working with. And that 3 persons would be my sufficient sample. But once you use the literature to justify your sample and your method, that's the way forward, aligned to, of course, your research questions, you're pretty much good.
All right. Thank you very much for that feedback. We have one query in the chat box. Salam, Dr. Vimala. I am Dr. Iman. Oh, we have another one before that. Sorry. All right. I am doing a mixed method research, and one of my challenges was conducting qualitative interviews online. During physical face-to-face interviews, we are able to take their non-verbal expressions, but this is very limited when doing online. Do you face any questioning about the limited ability to note taking their non-verbal expressions, and how do you overcome it? Dr. Vimala.
Wonderful question. I'm glad. Thank you so much for your compliment. Well, I'm seeing it as N8. I'm not sure who it is. You are doing mixed methods. That's great. You are conducting qualitative interviews online. So that's great. As I said, as I just explained, you can do, long time you used to have something called phone interviews. You could actually use phone, which was only audio, to interview, and you had to pick up everything. Now, most people use Zoom or Google Meet or something similar like that, but you may also choose to do audio because your participant may not want to be video, to have a video. So that's the first question. In your consent form, you may want to ask your participant, do you wish to be recorded audio only or audio and video? Again, ask that question in your consent form from the beginning, because that affects what you can do. If your interviewee is actually able to say, yes, I agree to be videotaped, and of course, all the privacy and security things that you take care of, then you should have, you will be actually immersed in this very live, very real sort of interview process. It literally is like the same thing as if you were in person. Just think of Oprah. Everybody's heard of Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey has done multiple interviews online, and where it's using video and video conferencing, and they have done it, right? And these are with kings and queens and presidents and all of that. So if you can get the consent to be video, it's great. If you can't, then it's audio only. And if it's audio only, then you have to transcribe it. I do not suggest you try to note take, even though you do annotate, and conduct an interview at the same time. You should either get help with somebody else who is doing those notes for you, somebody who's asking the questions. You have to be very focused in the interview. Time is very important. And you should also get it recorded and professionally transcribed, like using a transcriber like Otter.ai or using Microsoft Word. All of these have very good transcription built in. And then you verify the transcript with the interviewee afterwards. As I say, 90% of communication is nonverbal. So when you take up that 90%, you have the voice only. So there's a difference between what I'm doing here now, and you're seeing me, than if I do this. Then it's only my voice. And it depends on my enunciation. It depends on on how I choose to express myself, right? So it's a little bit different. So then you can cater for things like pauses, ers and as, or don't want to answer, and you can code that as well when you're coding your qualitative interviews, and build that in to somehow bring were there some topics or questions that the interviewee seemed less inclined to answer, or some that he wanted to talk on and on and on about. All of those things give you little cues about how you analyze your qualitative data. So I've just given you some ideas, which are, in your consent form, ask the person if they're willing to be videotaped or just only audio from the beginning, way before. Secondly, get somebody who is going to sit with you, who's going to assist you with taking some notes as they're listening as well. It's very difficult to do the interview and to be doing your own note taking. Thirdly, make sure it's properly recorded, save the recording, and do a professional transcription of that recording. Fourthly, send your transcription to be verified by the interviewee even more than once. Then clean up your transcription, but by adding codes in places where you think might have replicated what you might have noticed if you were doing it live. And that should help. Thank you.
All right. Another question from Intan. Hi, Dr. Vimala. That was such an impressive research design. How long did you take to complete the whole study? And how many was your quantitative sample size?
Yeah, couple of years. I think about 2 years. Yeah, 2 years to 2.5 years. The study took quite some time because, first of all, I didn't know much about mixed methods research at the time I was doing the study that I'm now reporting on. And also because I had to design everything from scratch, and I had to learn everything that I had to do. And because I wanted to do something different, I had to learn it and do it. So it did take me about 2.5 years. In terms of the number of participants, the number who registered, I had to close it. It was technically only supposed to run for 3 months. I actually ran it for 6 months, but I ran it for 6 months, and the number who stayed from beginning to end was 35, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was 35 generating data all the time. But a maximum of about 200 and something different registrants, yeah.
All right. Another question for you, Dr. Vimala, from Nurul Iman. Salam, Dr. Vimala. I'm Dr. Iman, a DRPH student from UPM. What time is there in Trinidad? It's 12 hours difference, Iman. So it's probably 11 p.m. in Trinidad at the moment.
Yes.
Thank you for spending your time to share with us. My question is, how much can researcher access for the SNS? For example, the private chat feature. How do you explain in the consent and let them feel safe yet free enough to be themselves while using the site? Thanks.
A very good question. That was actually because the site used asynchronous. A website is largely asynchronous, as you know. So they can access whatever the time, but when you want to do a live, when it's a private chat feature, I had to add on a separate command that may have been a live chat feature, as well as a live conferencing session, which was then synchronous. I had to add on another consent form to that you consent, that they had to send it through, and they had to actually say, by agreeing to this, I agree for whatever I write in here can be used as data for the research. So I had to build upon the original consent form that I had. So, and based on the consent form, I had to work with it. And because the chat feature was embedded on the website, and because it was only registered persons there, and the downloaded file was only on my laptop, that was part of the security that I could have afforded to them. And once they accepted that, then they participated. So it's not a public chat feature, it's a private chat feature. Yeah?
Okay.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Do we have any more questions from the participants? Dr. Noliza, do you have any questions? Dr. Afia? No? All right. So I suppose that would be the end of the session, this CME session for today. I would like to thank Dr. Vimala for the very good, very impressive talk just now. And we look forward for more future collaboration in the future, maybe.
Thank
Research, CMEs, more CMEs, probably seminars, that sort of things. Thank you so much again. And to all the participants, thank you so much for joining us this on the Friday morning. And don't forget to fill out the attendance forms in the chat box before we leave. And see you again in the future. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum. And good
Welcome.
day.